Hello, how you doing? I hope you're staying well during these extraordinary times. And it's just gone 9 o'clock here in Portstewart in Northern Ireland. I'm still staying at home during lockdown here. And as promised last week, I'm going to continue with readings from my memoirs. We've already been through Paperboy, and then last Friday I finished Bread Boy, and I'm going to continue on weekday evenings for the time being with the third installment of I suppose you could call it the Paperboy trilogy. It's my coming of age memoirs of growing up in Belfast in the 1970s, and this one into the early 1980s. So I'm going to start tonight with chapter one of All Grown Up. As you can see, it's called All Grown Up: What Bread Boy Did at University. And as you can see from the picture on the cover, it's kind of in early 1980s. You can see there, I've got my Bob Geldof t-shirt, I've got my Duran Duran suede boots, and I've got my Kids from Fame ankle warmers and my khaki trousers, like what Bono would have worn. And as you can see, I've also got my Spandau Ballet scarf on on there. And instead of a head, I've actually got a video camera because, well, that's what I was studying at university. So that tells you a little bit about the cover. Glad you could join me. And I'll say hello to a few people after a while. I'll take a wee break in the middle of this. So the first chapter of All Grown Up, it takes on a bit of a journey, actually. So you go from school to home to uh, to university all in one chapter. So I hope you enjoy this. So this is called Valentine's Day. I was a sex symbol, so I was. As a result of my recent triumph on the stage as Riff, the leader of the Jets in West Side Story, the entire first form girls hockey team at Belfast Royal Academy adored me. Who could blame them? I was 17 years old now and shaving twice a week. My newfound height and deeply broken voice, combined with the aroma of high karate aftershave, demonstrated to the world that I was a real man now. The same wee girls that once laughed at me for being a mere bread van delivery boy from up the Shankill now giggled with desire through their braces as I strode manfully toward them across the playground. I could disrupt a game of hopscotch in front of the junior girls' toilets like Charlton Heston parting the Red Sea in the Bible. Thomas O'Hara said a wee ginger girl with pigtails and a patch over one lens of her pink National Health glasses had even fixed a photograph of me inside her locker door with pink bubblegum after seeking me out among the glorious Rugger boys in the school magazine. It was a picture of me clicking my fingers on stage in a t-shirt, and in the heat of desire, this adoring fan had ripped out my image the way I sometimes did with the nicest ladies in the bra section of the Great Universal Club book. My adhesion to a girl's locker put me up there in the same league of desirability as Adam Ant with the makeup and Shakin' Stevens with the denims. I had Bo Derek coming out of the sea in a wet swimsuit on the inside of my locker door. It was evident that I was a sort of Bo Derek to the first form girls of Belfast Royal Academy. The only difference between me and these other sex symbols was that I hadn't actually had sex yet. I was a wee good living fella, and sex before marriage was a sin, even if you could get someone to do it with you. Our school production of West Side Story had received excellent reviews, except for one by a swanky lower sixth girl with a lisp who wrote a review for her English language class critiquing my performance as somewhat derivative and frankly nothing more meaningful or artistically substantial than a poor impersonation of the Fawns. I pulled her hair in the school dinner queue and mimicked her lisp, shouting, "Did that feel derivative, snobby knickered?" She started to cry and I felt guilty while eating my pink custard and coconut sponge because I had hurt a girl and I was supposed to be the only teenage pacifist from West Belfast. It was Friday, the 12th of February 1982, the last day of school before Valentine's Day and the third most important day in my life after passing the 11 plus and getting saved at the caravan site in Malahide. Everyone in Northern Ireland was still arguing about the Troubles and how it was all the other side's entire fault. Everybody in Belfast was raging about the layoffs at the DeLorean Motor Factory in Dunmurry, where they built fancy space-age cars that no one could ever afford to buy. But I had more important matters on my mind. A few weeks ago, I had received an official letter informing me that the 12th of February was the day of my interview for a place at university. I was just a wee lad from up the Shankill, although I had been a very good paper boy and an excellent bread boy, but today I was preparing for the next big step up the ladder of my career. There were very few jobs in Belfast, and there was talk of redundancies in the foundry where my father had worked all his life. In those days, a good job in Belfast was as rare as a hug on the peace line. And I knew what I must accomplish to progress in this limited job market. I could listen to my mother and try and get a good job in the bank so that I could come up in the world and move to Bangor. I could obey my granny and become a Presbyterian minister and get a house for free for preaching the gospel. But I had grander ambitions because I wanted to be the next Terry Wogan on BBC One. And if I hoped to become a great broadcaster with an Irish accent, simply helping my father as the assistant DJ at the Westie Disco every Saturday night would not suffice. To transform myself into a professional, I needed to go to university and become a student and an intellectual. Titch McCracken said all students did was smoke marijuana and support the IRA, but I was undeterred. I was determined to grasp the opportunity to go where very few of my peers from the Upper Shankill had boldly gone before. I wanted to be like Captain James T. Kirk, seeking out new worlds and civilizations, except with books instead of phaser guns. After all, this is what my father had been working for in the foundry all these years. This was the reason why my mother had sewed thousands of dresses for posh ladies up the Lisburn Road to wear to dinner dances at the Chimney Corner Hotel. No one in my family had ever earned a degree, though there had been great expectations a few years ago when my big brother got into Queen's University. I had never seen my father so proud. My big brother loved the social life, but he hated studying economics, and eventually he gave it up for a good job in shorts. Now it was my turn, and I was determined to see it through until my graduation day, when I would get to wear robes and a funny hat with a tassel. I had applied to the new University of Ulster to take a BA Honours degree in Media Studies. I understood that this was the best route for me to pursue if I wanted to become a great journalist like the ones in America that got Richard Nixon into trouble, or at least to have my own chat show on BBC One interviewing Ronnie Corbett and Joanna Lumley. The university was, as the name suggested, new. It was in Coleraine, which was somewhere beyond Glengormley and near Portrush, where you went on Easter Monday for fish and chips, a paddle in the sea, and a ride on the ghost train in Barry's Amusements. John Hume said it was an injustice that the new university had not been built in Derry, which was Catholic for Londonderry. However, on this momentous day, I had pressing business to conduct at school before catching the train to Coleraine. Every year, the School Charity Committee, of which I was a long-serving member, organised a school postal service for Valentine's Day. It was a very successful charitable enterprise. The pupils paid 10p for a school stamp. The Valentine's Day cards were delivered during second period, and lots of children in Africa were saved. This year, Valentine's Day was on a Sunday, so the cards were delivered on Friday while we were still at school. It was probably a sin to send love cards on the Sabbath anyway. I was certain that the film star status I had attained in the wake of West Side Story meant I would receive more cards than any other boy in my class. So I'll say hello to a few people before we see what happens next. So who's saying hello? Good evening, Angela and Keith. Lovely to have you along again. Hello, Evelyn Brown. Good evening to you. Good evening, Dee Smith. Hi, Jim Poole. I can't wait, he says. Yes, good. Well, hope you enjoy it, Jim. Good evening, Norma Fleming. Hope you're keeping well. Hi, Susan Wilgar. Still at work. Hope I make it back before it's over. Okay, you can listen again if you missed the start, Susan. Hello, good evening, Anne Kirk. How you doing? Jean Jeffrey. Good evening, Tony. I have your trilogy and I've read it. And you're currently reading the Belfast Gate. That's the latest one, Belfast Gate. My first novel. Lovely. Hello, good evening, Marlene Williamson. Let me see here. Betty O'Riordan. Hi, Tony. Miss Friday's reading, so I'm catching up. Delighted you're reading the third book. Delighted that you're joining me, Betty. Good evening, Michael McKinley Sr. Let me see who else is here. Hello, Patricia Higgins McMillan from Ontario in Canada. Lovely to have you all with me this evening. I'll keep going with what happened on the 12th of February, 1982. My love life. Oh no, sorry, I went ahead of myself there. Second period at school was Miles, and as Miss Brown with the nice smile and sensible shoes patiently explained the meaning of an indecipherable equation, I was busy daydreaming about receiving more Valentine's Day cards than Timothy Longsley. This was very important to me because Timothy was a rugby-playing genius who lived up the Antrim Road in a mansion with an avocado bidet and a flowering cherry tree. All the girls fancied Timothy, and he knew it. He snogged them and chucked them away like chewed up sticks of Wrigley's gum in the playground. Today was a rare opportunity for me to beat him at something. My love life had become very complicated in recent years. It was like an episode of Dallas, but with fewer shoulder pads because John Fraser's and Gresham Street didn't stock them yet. When I split up with Judy Carlton, it was almost as shocking as when Agnetha and Bjorn got divorced. Knowing me, knowing her, there was nothing we could do. After Judy, I went out with Lindsay Johnson with the breasts and the new wave hair. Lindsay loved peace and God and was even more good living than me. She was a very good kisser, but Jesus told her to chuck me to revise for her A-levels. This breakup seemed to be less of a shock to the middle sixth form than my estrangement with Judy. It was more akin to when Frida and Benny completed the ABBA marriage breakdown. Now I was a man and shaving twice a week. I was learning from personal experience the truth of the lyrics of The Winner Takes It All. As Miss Brown continued with a reasonable explanation of a most unreasonable A-level question, I waited impatiently for the school post to arrive, fiddling with a stapler the teacher had absent-mindedly left on the desk. I could see from the clock above the blackboard that it was nearly 10 o'clock. This was the exact time I knew I had to leave school to go home and put on my good suit before taking a black taxi into the city centre to the train station. My cards had better hurry up, I whispered to Aaron Ward, who was sitting in front of me. Aaron was brilliant at rugby and cricket and anything involving running or balls, but I liked him anyway. What are you like, wee lad? He replied. I've an interview at the NUU today, I said proudly. You're not going to Toy Town next year, are you? He asked. Toy Town was what people who wanted to go to Queen's University condescendingly called the New University of Ulster. Just then, the door of the classroom burst open, and in my excitement, I stapled my thumb. Tony! Cried Miss Brown with a genuine shriek of concern. Denise Clyde and Joanne Galt stared in horror at my bloody thumb, and from the back of the classroom I heard a hearty snort from Timothy Longsley. What are you like, wee lad? Repeated Aaron Ward. I pretended that the injection of a staple through my flesh had not hurt in the least, as I extracted it from my throbbing thumb. I then had to suck my thumb to stop the bleeding, and I hit a reddener because I realised I must look just like Linda Milligan, who still sucked her thumb when doing the hardest maths questions and cried when she didn't get an A. Oblivious to the bloodbath at my desk, two spotty third formers from the charity committee began to deliver the Valentine's Day cards to the desks of the most beloved in the class. Thomas O'Hara got one small card with lipstick kisses all over it, and Denise Clyde got one huge card in a pink envelope with SWALK written all over it. This was not, as I first suspected, the acronym for yet another new paramilitary organisation, because apparently these letters stood for Sealed with a Loving Kiss. Everyone said Denise's card was from Frankie Jones, and judging by the flush of his cheeks, I agreed. Frankie was the class expert on sex, both theory and practice, albeit mostly solo, and was not usually embarrassed by anything. His uncharacteristic blushes just proved to the whole maths class that he had sent the card to Denise. It seemed that Frankie wanted a relationship with a real live female rather than the women in the page of the well-thumbed Playboy magazines hidden in a school bag, which I never once peeked at during break times when no one was looking. Finally, it was my turn to receive the post. It soon became clear that the two clever third formers were deliberately keeping me to the end for dramatic effect. In fact, I felt a drum roll would have been appropriate. As the post girls approached my desk and opened the mailbag, my senses were struck with the overpowering scent of Charlie perfume, which had been lovingly sprayed on each Valentine's card. Firstly, the girls produced 3 small brown envelopes, like the ones my father sometimes borrowed from the office in the foundry. 2 of these envelopes contained rather amateur handmade cards from girls who had obviously been watching too much Blue Peter, but it was the thought that counted. The other brown envelope contained a note in strangely familiar handwriting, which read, "Who would want to send you a Valentine card, you big fruit?" I wondered how my big brother had managed to infiltrate the school postal system. Next, I was presented with a pile of bright white envelopes containing a selection of Charlie Brown, Paddington Bear, and Love Is cards. It seemed that every girl in the school wanted a cartoon character to endorse her expression of love for me. After this, I was handed 5 medium-sized cards in pink envelopes, which must have cost a bomb in the smoke damage sale in Easton's. Finally, after a short but dramatic pause, similar to the one just before Michael Aspel announced who had won Miss World, the post girls revealed 2 enormous pink envelopes. One of these giant envelopes was covered in glitter and was sticky with strong, sweet-smelling glue. My pile of cards now covered half the surface of my desk. This reminded me of when they emptied out the votes from the Reverend Ian Paisley's ballot boxes onto big tables to count at the King's Hall in elections. The class spontaneously gave me a round of applause, which was a bit of a relief, as this turn of events could have easily left me open to jealous hostility from the less idolised in the class. Miss Brown looked on in genuine amazement as I opened my cards, staining each of them with blood from my stapled thumb, which rather fittingly matched the envelope, the red lipstick kisses on the envelopes. The opening of every new envelope revealed a fresh expression of undying love. I had never read so many versions of Roses Are Red, Violets Are Blue in my life. I sensed that the whole class was impressed by the grand total of 14, yes, 14 cards on my desk. This is more than I'd ever received on my birthday, including the year I was in bed with the chicken pox and a bottle of Lucozade. I was certain the other boys were jealous, but the girls seemed thrilled to have the privilege of sharing a classroom with a sex symbol. I knew I should remain humble, despite being blessed with the good looks and charisma to attract such worship, but I couldn't resist the temptation to turn to Timothy Longsley and mouthed, "Sickener," with a smile. It was only when I turned back towards Miss Brown and her valiant efforts to redirect our attention to algebra that I noticed the clock now said 10:20 a.m. My heart skipped a beat. I was late. I had to go. I had a bus to catch and a good suit to put on and a black taxi to take down the Shankill Road to catch a train to Coleraine to become a graduate and a famous broadcaster. Excuse me, miss, I have to go to my university interview now, so I do. I explained quickly to Miss Brown, handing her a note from my mammy, putting on my duffel coat and gathering together my school books and 14 Valentine's cards. As I pushed towards the door, I dropped a Paddington Bear card and Lyndon Mulligan picked it up, flicked her attempted purdy bob, fluttered her eyelashes and said suggestively, I wonder who sent you this one. What are you like, wee lad? I heard Aaron Ward say as I left, slamming the classroom door behind me. As I ran across the playground and out of the front gates of BRA, the imposing granite structure of the ancient Crombie building looked down upon me and seemed to tut heavily. How could a pupil from this prestigious grammar school be late for the most important academic appointment of his life? This was worse than being late for Al Mac's paper round, or Leslie McGregor's bread round, or the morning service in Ballygomartin Presbyterian Church. I darted past a British Army Saracen and a foot patrol of soldiers with big boots and guns and camouflaged faces. Panic set in because I knew it looked as if I was running away from a situation, and I prayed that my grammar school scarf, duffel coat, and selection of Charlie Brown Valentine's Day cards would be a good enough alibi for any allegations that I was fleeing the scene of a terrorist-related crime. Thankfully, the foot patrol ignored me, apart from one young soldier who aimed his gun at me for practice. I carried on running and arrived in a sweat at the bus stop. I hoped the bus hadn't been hijacked that day and prayed that one would come soon. I waited impatiently for 10 minutes until I decided it would be quicker to run the 3 miles home across the peace lines than rely on a bus to take me into the city centre and then risk trying to find another bus up the Shankill Road. Reliable public transport was as rare as forgiveness in 1980s Belfast. As I raced up the Cliftonville Road, I was conscious that the large pink envelopes sticking out of my school bag and smelling of Charlie perfume would not be beneficial if I encountered any wee hoods intent on beating me up for being a snob or a Protestant or both. But I soon arrived safely on the Crumlin Road and dashed up one side of the road on the Protestant pavement between the peace walls and past the big Catholic chapel beside Ardoyne where the IRA lived. Suddenly, 2 teenage girls who were obviously Mitch and Millies emerged from beside the Ardoyne shops and began to follow me. I considered the possible humiliation of being the victim of a female sectarian attack and hurried on. However, as the girls drew closer, smoking and twirling their chewing gum on their fingers, one of them said, "You're lovely, wee lad. You look like Paul Young, so you do." I was very flattered because Paul Young was a brilliant singer whose hair I copied with gel from Boots. Had I not been in such a hurry, I would have stopped and discussed with these girls from the other side how we could build peace across the barricades together, because I was the only Protestant pacifist on the peace line. But there wasn't even time for peacemaking today. I carried on running, but I was certain I heard the other girls saying, "Wise up, wee girl, your man's a boot." I leapt across the peace line like a determined rioter hurtling a petrol bomb and scurried up Tweddell Avenue, past the prim Protestant hedges of customers I delivered bread to every Saturday morning from the Ormo mini shop. It was a cold February day, but I was sweating like a pig, though the merciful Belfast drizzle on my face helped to cool me down. I swept past the Eagle newsagent shop on the Ballygomartin Road, where Al Mac was busy loading hundreds of Belfast telegraphs into his new red Ford Transit van to distribute to his latest crew of paperboys, including my wee brother, who was dutifully following in my professional footsteps. "Bouchie, Mac!" I shouted to my former employer as I flitted by. Al Mac turned around and stared at the strange figure in a duffel coat sprinting past with pink envelopes falling out of his school bag. A look of vague recognition crossed his wrinkled face as he took a drag of cigarette and pulled up his trousers, which were now held up by string that had once bound together batches of newspapers. As I turned the corner towards the Glencairn estate, I could hear Old Mac in the distance shouting, "What in the name of Jesus was that?" Finally, I had to zip up the Ballygomartin road, past the Westy Disco Hut, the site of my greatest snogs, past our church, and then up the tortuously steep hill to our estate. When I arrived at our rickety front gate, I checked the time. According to my new digital watch, it was 10:59, which is digital for nearly 11 o'clock. I retrieved the front door key from beneath the doormat, dropped my Valentine-laden school bag in the hall, and climbed the stairs, 3 shag-piled steps at a time. I changed as swiftly as I could, like a Superman in a telephone box, and within seconds I was out of my school uniform and in my leather brogues and a good blue suit, which was 20 weeks at 99p from the Great Universal Club book. To complete this breakneck transformation, I splashed on some of my father's Old Spice to make me smell older and less sweaty, and I put on a skinny red leather tie like the one Michael Jackson wore, although Michael's tie probably wasn't reduced to half price in the bomb damage sale in John Fraser's. I was going to make it. My sprint home had saved time. It was at 11:15 a.m. When I left the house in my good suit, clutching my interview letter and a piece and jam I'd hurriedly made in the kitchen, I could catch a black taxi down the road in 5 minutes and make it to the train station before noon. I was elated to know that in spite of the awful risk I had taken earlier, that on this day I could have it all after all. I could receive the most Valentine cards for any boy in the long history of BRA and be en route to my place at university within an hour. As I waited at the bus stop, I thanked God for looking after me and keeping me from being late or shot. As the minutes beeped away on my digital watch, though, I began to fret. What was keeping the black taxi? I hadn't seen any vehicles on the road for a while. Was the road being blocked to save Ulster? Had the Provos blown up more shops in the town to free Ireland? Friday was always the most popular day of the week for bombs in Belfast. "Listen, love, there's trouble down the road and all the buses and taxis is off," shouted Billy Cooper's granny from across the street. She was one of my best bread customers in the estate, especially on a Saturday morning. "And don't forget my pan, my plain, and my 2 soda and 2 potato the morrow morning," she said. This was typical of Belfast. Just when I was about to do something important, the troubles got in the way. I had to start running again. This time, I jogged down the Ballygomartin road, taking a shortcut through Woodvale Park and past a tree with a faded carving of "Tony Loves Sharon" in the bark. Then I scooted down the road past the Shankle graveyard where lots of children had died much too young many years ago, passing his and hers hairdressers where they parent my mother and all the local pensioners. I flew past the falling down stadium cinema opposite Spinadisc where I bought all my 45s and the Shankle library where I had borrowed all the Narnia books and The Hobbit. I ran on past all the churches and pubs and King Billy murals, passing all the great wee shops and the smell of salt and vinegar from Beatty's fish and chip shop. By the time I reached the city centre, I was out of breath and had an awful stitch in my side. So the queue at the security gate, where you got searched for bombs, provided a welcome opportunity for a rest. Once I'd been thoroughly frisked by a fat man with hairs up his nose, I checked my digital watch again. It was 11:49, which was digital for nearly too late for the 12 o'clock train to Coleraine. I zoomed towards the train station as fast as I could, but my shins were very sore now from sprinting in my good brogues from the bargain bucket in McManus's shoes. I tried to convince myself that I might just make it. By the time I got to the train station, it was 11:55. In the queue, a granny with a shopping trolley dropped her purse, and I helped her retrieve it with a level of urgency that seemed to disturb her. after she had completed the longest purchase of a return ticket to Lisburn in the history of Northern Ireland Railways. I bought my ticket and tore towards the platform as my watch beat noon. Arriving on the platform, I could not believe my eyes. The last carriage of the Coleraine train was just disappearing out of the station. My heart sank like a poor swimmer in the Ormeau baths. I imagined I was in one of those black and white movies on BBC Two on a Saturday afternoon that made my mother cry. My sweetheart had been waiting for me on the train so we could run off together and live happily ever after in Paris. But it was late and she had departed. I was late and she had departed alone, heartbroken in the mistaken belief that I no longer wanted to be her lover. A friendly railway man with one buck tooth interrupted my Hollywood reverie. "If you run quick, son, you might still catch the bus to Coleraine," he advised, pointing to me towards the bus station across the bridge. Off I looked again. What if I missed the bus too? How could I get a degree if I couldn't even use public transport? I was annoyed at myself, and there was no one else to blame, not even my big brother or the provost. All of my father's overtime at the foundry would come to nothing because I had been so proud and big-headed over getting more Valentine cards than anyone else in my class. I recalled the words of the Reverend Lowe in church, "Pride cometh before a fall." My fall was comething, so it was. I reached the bus station, exhausted and perspiring heavily through my good suit. The bus to Coleraine was driving off dispassionately. It was within spitting distance, but I was too late and too tired and upset to spit. This was worse than turning up at the City Hall to watch the 12 parades after all the bands had already marched to the field. My career prospects were devastated. As I stood alone in the bus station, I had to try hard not to cry in public. This would only have completed my humiliation. Boys weren't allowed to cry because it meant you were a homosexual. It was pathetic. I was 17 years old now and shaving twice a week, but all I wanted to do was cry and tell my mommy. I found one of the least vandalised telephone boxes, which as usual spelt of P, and I looked up the telephone number for Mackie's in the dirty yellow pages. My mother was working in the wages office at the foundry now because the pay was better than sewing dresses and she no longer had to stay at home all the time to look after us. "Can I speak to Mrs. Macaulay in wages, please?" I asked. "I'm her son."
"Yes, love, just hang on a wee minute,"
said the operator. "What's wrong?" shrieked Mommy. A phone call at work usually meant someone was ill or dead, so I reassured her that I was neither. I confessed that I had missed the train and said I didn't know what to do and whined that I was never going to get into university and I ended up signing on the dole in Snugville Street for the rest of my life. "Oh my God, wee fella, that head of yours is full of sweetie mice," was her initial response. But then she came up with a solution. "Come on you up to the foundry and get the car keys from your daddy and drive up to Coleraine yourself in the new car. I'll phone the university and tell them you're going to be late." This was the perfect solution. Wee Betty was a brilliant problem solver. Of course, her family did give her lots of opportunities to practice. "I don't know what we're going to do with you, son," were the final words on the phone before the pips went and my 10p ran out. Within seconds, I was off running again. This was worse than being chased by wee hoods when I was collecting the money on a Friday night paper round. It was more physically demanding than a month of Saturday morning bread delivery with the Ormeau mini shop. The strain on my legs was greater than when I was forced to do a 3-mile cross-country run up the Cave Hill by a spiteful PE teacher as a punishment for being crap at rugby. The most direct route to the foundry was up the Grosvenor Road, on the Catholic side of the Peace Wall, past lampposts flying Irish tricolours instead of Union Jacks, so I knew the journey would be treacherous. As I galloped past murals of Bobby Sands, my granny's words were ringing in my ears. "Them hunger striker murals are a blinking disgrace." At any moment I could be stopped by an IRA man and exposed as a wee prod and a legitimate target. This possibility accelerated my pace considerably up the Grosvenor Road and alongside the Royal Victoria Hospital. I feared I would be inside the hospital soon on an operating table, having bullets removed without an anaesthetic like a good cowboy shot by a gang of outlaws in the Wild West. This terror spurred me on as I crossed the Falls Road at Hijack Corner, keeping my head down and at the same time trying to look nonchalant at speed in good brogues, a suit and a tie. What would happen if the people of the Falls Road mistook me for a tick man or a Mormon being chased from door-to-door duties? Mercifully, I arrived unscathed at the front door of the Mackey's offices, where my mother was waiting in her good beige anorak from the British Home Store's January sale. She was biting her nails and she looked relieved to see me. "I don't know what we're going to do with you, wee lad. Your head's in cloud bloody cuckoo land. It's not my fault, Mummy, the buses were off, and I'm sweltered and my legs are killing me and I've got a desperate stitch in my side. You'll have to run down to the Albert Foundry and get the car keys from your daddy," she said. "Now, away you go, and don't be worrying. It'll be all right, love, so it will." I scooted down the side street off the main Springfield Road, where millions of men in overalls went to work every morning, and headed towards the huge metal gate at the entrance to the foundry. "I'm Eric Macaulay's son. He's the foreman from Engineering 2, and I need to see him for an emergency," I explained to the security man on the front gate. He looked me up and down and decided that I was not a terrorist disguised in a cheap suit and Michael Jackson tie attempting to blow up the factory for Ireland. "Go on ahead, son. Your dad's a right fella, so he is," he said gruffly. I had never set foot in the foundry before, and when I reached the factory floor, I stopped, struggling to take it all in. There was nothing light or comforting or soft here. It was huge and hot and sweaty and noisy, and I was surrounded by serious-looking men wearing protective goggles. There was molten metal, sparks flying in every direction, and a cacophony of metallic clanks and bangs that made me jump. I had galloped straight into hell. It was like a scene from a post-apocalyptic science fiction movie, but this was real life on the Springfield Road. Mackey's was like Mad Max. It dawned on me that my father was a hero like Mel Gibson, struggling to survive every day in a hostile environment for the sake of his family. I had heard many stories about the foundry, the hard work, the good men, the poor pay, and the bad bosses, but I had never experienced the reality of this before. This was where my father had worked for 30 years so that I would never have to. "No son of mine is going to spend his life breaking his back for buttons," he would say. I was suddenly very conscious of my formal attire. The men working around me wore overalls stained with oil, and I stood out like an orange man at a novena. The grease and sweat on the men's faces made me feel clean and privileged and lazy. I noticed all the men had chunky, dirty hands that made mine look white and soft like a lady's hands in a fairy liquid commercial. I stuck my hands in my pockets, certain these hard-working men were thinking to themselves, "What the hell's a wee soft snob like that doing in a place like this?" I had started moving back towards the door when an older man with kind eyes and blue overalls tapped me on the shoulder. "You're not supposed to be in here, son," he said, sensing my discomfort. "I'm Eric Macaulay's son, and I need to see him for an emergency," I shouted over the clamour of industry, trying not to sound too grammar school. "Ah, your dad's a right fella, so he is. He's very proud of you three wee boys," he said kindly, as if he'd known me all my life. He patted me on the back, just for being my father's son, and pointed to a sort of office with dirty plastic windows in the corner of the foundry. "Your dad's over there," he said. I was never so glad to see the back of my father's baldy head. As I approached the office, ducking flying sparks en route, I could see that Dad was standing in the office, surrounded by a group of tough-looking men in overalls who hung on his every word. They were looking at a huge piece of machinery on a big metal table. When I reached the door, Dad was explaining how to fix this monstrous clump of cogs in the same way he once tried to explain to me how to fix my remote control Dalek when my big brother had kicked its sucker off just for badness. Suddenly he noticed his very clean son in a suit at the door of the foundry office. He stopped immediately and strode towards me in a manner that suggested both concern and anger. "Here's the car keys, you stupid wee glipe," he said, throwing them at me. "Are you going to throw away your chances of not ending up in a place like this because your head's in the bloody clouds?" "It's not my fault. The buses were off and I'm sweltered and I've got a desperate stitch," I replied, catching the car keys by the key ring with one hand and cupping the pain in my side dramatically with the other. But as soon as I uttered these words, I felt guilty. The men in this place knew what it was like to be sweltered and have a stitch in their side every day. Until that moment, I had been truly ignorant of the daily life of a working man. My bread round was a Sunday school picnic compared to this. "Are you going to stand there like a wee prig, or are you going to get your arse out of here?" shouted my father. I turned to make my way towards the car park, and he added, "Now away you go, and don't be worrying. It'll be all right, son, so it will." Within 2 minutes, I was in the foundry car park, and there it was before me, our brand new car. The humiliating days of the Ford Escort respray were behind us now. This was the first time we had ever been able to afford a brand new car on hire purchase. And now that I'd finally passed my driving test, I could drive it with pride. It was a brand new green Simca. A Skoda was deemed less reliable, and a Lada was slightly outside of our price range. I called it the Green Dream Machine, but Timothy Longsley called it a Simp car. I jumped into the gleaming green vehicle, settled into the full suede driver's seat, turned the ignition key, and began my epic journey to university. As I left West Belfast, I turned on our very first car radio, and the Jam were singing A Town Called Malice. As I rocketed up the motorway, leaving behind all that was familiar, that odd-looking wee man from Soft Cell was coincidentally singing Say Hello, Wave Goodbye. When I reached the edge of the city, I felt like an Apollo astronaut, about to break free from the Earth's gravitational pull for the first time. I was all alone, driving north of Glengormley for the first time in my life. For a moment, I forgot that I was late for my university interview. When the Radio 1 DJ, Peter Powell with the Perm, introduced Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark's new single, it seemed like the perfect theme tune for my hopeful new beginnings. I turned up the radio to full volume, and with the grand synthesized sounds of Maid of Orleans filling the interior of the Simca, I imagined I had just stolen my granddaddy's red Cadillac convertible from South Fork Ranch in Dallas and was speeding along Route 66 in sunglasses and a Stetson hat on my way to become the richest and most famous man in America. I was dead excited, so I was. So there you are. That's chapter 1 of All Growed Up. Thanks very much for joining me. So I'll just say hello to a few more people. Hello, Neve Sahafian. Good to have you here. And Kenneth Glenville. Hi, Marty McCauley. Yes, I'm going to keep reading. Hello there, Karen Shaya. Love your stories. They keep me going. I'm glad they're good for that, Karen. That's what it's all about. Hello to Aline Bonner. I missed the start. We'll watch some start later. Looking forward to it. That's great. Francis McGrath. Glad you're enjoying chapter 1. Norma Fleming. I'm exhausted thinking about all that running. Yes, there's a lot of running that day. I don't think I've ever run so much since, to be honest. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Michael McKinley and Davy Calder said, thanks for continuing. Glad you're enjoying it. Thanks, says Nigel McComb. Brilliant, Tony. Thanks again, says Evelyn. Thanks, Tony, says Susan. And great, says Norma. I'm glad you all enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow night at 9 o'clock UK time for chapter 2 of All Growed Up. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and stay positive.